Hey everybody, welcome back to the FITSNews studio, another edition of your Week in Review. I am Will Folks, founding editor of FITSNews.com, your host for this show. A ton of news to get to this week. We're going to start with a huge story at the South Carolina State House, one with potentially serious criminal and political repercussions. I'm going to walk you through the very latest on the saga of State Representative R.J. May. I'm also going to sit down with our Andy Fancher, who's going to be covering that story, about a story out of Greenwood, South Carolina, that just a total mystery involving a dead teenager whose body was found in the woods just feet from his home where he went missing months earlier. Jen Wood and I are also going to sit down and break down a ton of news related to South Carolina's court system, including a little bit of Murdaugh news, but also a new podcast that has come out making some bizarre claims. We're going to walk you through those. Last but not least, Dylan Nolan and I are going to sit down and discuss the latest state of play in the 2024 presidential race, including a scandal surrounding Kamala Harris's vice presidential selection. All that and more heading your way on the Week in Review. So obviously this week, one of the big stories statewide was Tropical Storm Debbie. Now this is a system our media outlet was tracking from the very beginning, before it even became a tropical depression just north of Cuba. We followed it as it made its way up the Gulf of Mexico, impacted Florida's Big Bend, and then loitered off the coast of South Carolina for what felt like forever, dumping tons of rainfall all across the low country. We saw serious flash flooding, regional flooding. We're now threatened by river flooding. So Debbie really a downer all week for the people of South Carolina. We're still trying to figure out exactly what the full extent of the damage is. But again, FITSNews has been tracking the tropics all summer long. We're going to continue to track those storms. In fact, there's another wave out there as we film this that could start impacting the continental United States as early as next week. South Carolina, obviously in the middle of Hurricane Alley. So keep it tuned to FITSNews as we follow those weather stories. We've got a new weather page up. You can check all that out at FITSNews.com. But by far and away, the highest traffic story on our site this week involved State Representative R.J. May. Now, for those of you unfamiliar, R.J. May, a second-term state lawmaker from West Columbia, South Carolina. He is the former vice chairman of the South Carolina Freedom Caucus, a group of conservative lawmakers that this media outlet has supported in many of their efforts to fight the status quo at the State House in Columbia. R.J. May is someone who has been in this studio, who has sat down and interviewed with me, somebody whose ideological positions I've generally agreed with and supported. In fact, R.J. and many of his fellow lawmakers I personally endorsed ahead of the Republican primary elections in June. But this week, R.J. May facing some incredibly serious allegations. And I want to point out, at this point, these are just allegations. There have been no charges filed. No warrants, to our knowledge, have been issued for his arrest. But we did confirm earlier this week that on Monday morning, agents of the Department of Homeland Security's Homeland Security Investigations Unit, HSI, conducted a search warrant or executed a search warrant on May's West Columbia, South Carolina home. Now, they were accompanied by agents of the South Carolina State Law Enforcement Division. Now, our first report on this situation, that was all we could confirm, that a warrant was executed. There was plenty of speculation about what it might have been targeting, what it might have found, but at that point, that was all we knew. Now, the following day, earlier this week, we also reported on the focus of that investigation. And as we reported exclusively, the focus of the investigation involves allegations regarding what are called now child sex abuse materials. I still call it child porn. To me, that still sounds sufficiently awful, but apparently the new en vogue term, child sex abuse materials, but whatever you want to call it, very bad stuff allegedly associated with that investigation. Now, again, we don't know particulars. We don't know specifically what was sought, what was taken. We don't know whether or not that search warrant will result in an arrest warrant, an affidavit, probable cause, warrants for R.J. May's arrest. We don't know any of that yet, but we do know that the focus of that investigation involved those child sex abuse materials. Now, this story has dominated discussion across the Palmetto State this week. Politicos have just been tracking this story intently, trying to follow its latest twists and turns. And moving forward for our media outlet, we are going to have our top reporter, Andy Fancher, on this case. Andy has been one of the deepest divers on so many of these stories. He's going to be digging into this story as we move forward. Andy, you're here with us today. Is there anything you can tell us about the R.J. May story other than what we've reported?
No.
Really? Okay.
So what I can say is that the State House is obviously talking, and as with any situation of this nature, rumors are proliferating, and I'm hearing all of them out. You know, it's not to say that we've had smoke alarms lead to fire in the past, but all they are at this time are rumors. What I can say I've done is I have since reached out to SLED, who has referred any and all media inquiries to the Department of Homeland Security at this time. We have reached out to the Department of Homeland Security, who, to their credit, was very responsive, only to say they have nothing more to add at this time. And that is where we are at the moment.
Well, obviously, as with anybody accused of any crime, we say this in all our stories, there's a presumption of innocence. And obviously, R.J. May has yet to be accused at this point. These are merely reports of a search.
Right.
There are no arrests that we know of at this point, but obviously we're going to keep a close eye on that. Andy, look forward to hearing more from you as your investigations continue. I know you've been hard at work, but I also appreciate the fact that you don't report something unless we know it's true or believe it to be true from sources with direct knowledge. I appreciate that.
Well, if anybody at FITSNews knows me, they know I'm a stickler for receipts. Sometimes even when I get the receipts, I'm hesitant on publishing. Just look at Lawrence County Sheriff's Office for an example. But in that breath, I encourage anybody, whether it be something a rumor or beyond that, to reach out to me at andy@fitsnews.com as I continue to investigate this impartially with all the attention that it most certainly deserves.
Yeah, and obviously we're going to keep an eye not only on this story as it evolves in the potentially the criminal arena, but obviously it's part of an investigation. We're going to try to keep tabs on what's happening with that broader investigation and certainly the political fallout and ramifications, because this was a guy, this is a guy, R.J. May, who was very involved in this pitched battle between the factions of the Republican Party here in South Carolina, and it was a big battle in that primary season. So we're going to obviously see how this impacts.
And I suppose the successes, the recent successes with the South Carolina Freedom Caucus has led to some alleging this is a ruse. In fact, we saw an op-ed published just this week on a Substack where they were critical of our reporting of the incident, which they have every right to be. Absolutely. Because this is a very sensitive case dealing with some of the worst possible allegations that somebody can face. But again, as far as I'm concerned, I'm looking at the facts. It doesn't matter who it surrounds, where the allegations are directed towards. I'm just worried about the facts.
Absolutely. That's why we put you on the case too. We know you'll go wherever it leads, wherever it leads. Andy, speaking of stories that you can talk a little bit about, we've got something up in Greenwood, South Carolina that is just a story that shocking, mysterious. There's
appalling, concerning, dumbfounding. Right. Greenwood County, South Carolina, approximately 70 miles from the capital city of Columbia, some hour and 18 minutes, in a small town called 96, South Carolina. Investigators of the Greenwood County Sheriff's Office discovered the skeletal remains of a missing person last month, June 6th. We have since obtained the incident reports, a biological report of those remains, which were later confirmed to be that of Tyrell Marcus Ali Wallace, a 19-year-old, recent graduate of 96 High School there in Greenwood County, South Carolina. And quite honestly, that's all we and investigators know at this time, which is that he died.
But we've heard reports of torture, of gang activity. I mean, walk us through some of these wild...
So in accordance with rumors, they have been proliferating throughout the upstate relating to this kid's death. And they all started before he was even found. See, Tyrell was last recorded alive on May 7th while applying for a seasonal position at Hardee's, a local Hardee's there on Main Street. And we have since spoken with an employee over at Hardee's who confirmed that he had worked there probably 15 months prior and that he was having network cellular issues that day, preventing him from mandatorily texting his application. I think it was like Hardee's 5 to 2500. And he spoke with a shift leader and exited the establishment. Believed to have walked about 1.4 miles back to his house. And that's it.
Yeah, and apparently his mother said there was a hot meal waiting for him, but she found a window open and the hot meal untouched.
Right. So for clarification on that front, she had made dinner the night before. So his single mother, Kanetta Robinson Bay, had made dinner for approximately 4 of her 6 children, and he did not come to get the dinner the night before. All right, on May 6th.
Okay.
So she takes her ID, and upon her testimony, she props open the door, pushes it open, sees that the window is wide open to his room, that his PlayStation TV's plugged up, and she didn't think much of it. In fact, she said that the window thing is not new to her. If the kids are locked out, they're not locked out for long. So come May 7th, he is recorded at that Hardee's, and that's it.
Where was he found?
So he was found approximately 225 feet from his mother's house, the very house where the window was purportedly left open on May 6th.
Like, is this a neighborhood or is it woods? Where?
So it's a rural neighborhood. It's a very wooded area, very vegetated area, and he was found within a grove adjacent to his mother's house. Now, on this side of the road, Murray Drive, there's only 2 houses, and I've been told that one of them's vacant, so it's just her house, essentially. There is a grove surrounded by, a trailer on one side, another property resident on another side, and his mother, as well as many other community members, do not believe that he just walked into this grove 225 feet from his mother's house and died. Mm-hmm. And it would take investigators 31 days after he was last recorded alive at that Hardee's to find those remains, as well as a book bag containing some promotional material from the South Carolina National Guard, his birth certificate, some jewelry, I think a necklace, a bracelet, a vape, and a cellular device, which they valued altogether to be less than $300. But this is certainly a contentious case for the area, certainly not something that happens usually in the area. And the rumors have proliferated to such a degree that a local business actually had to close down temporarily because they were accused of harboring his remains during that time that's unaccounted for between the time he was reported missing, which was actually May 10th. His mother reported him missing that Friday, and him ultimately being found, again, 31 days after he was last recorded alive. So business had to close temporarily, and since that time, about 3 different families have landed in the crosshairs of Facebook users.
Anything on how he died or any theories as to what may have caused his death?
So according to investigators who were very willing to speak with us, and I do want to give credit to the Greenwood County Sheriff's Office for being so responsive and to answering 6 rather difficult questions. I wouldn't say difficult, but questions that certainly required a lot of detail, which they got back with us within days.
That's great.
Which is also an indication that maybe they are as confused as the public is as to what happened. So, right, as you initially stated, there have been rumors of kidnapping, torture, desecration of human remains that have certainly been stoked by way of screenshots shared throughout the area of people purportedly having photographs of the aforementioned happening. But according to investigators,
pictures of the torture,
pictures of a field burning, pictures indicating that people have admitted to these injustices. Mm-hmm. But according to investigators, his remains were so decomposed that there was no way of determining the cause of death, as they could not perform an autopsy. In fact, his remains were sent to at least 3 different coroner's offices before ultimately being sent to an anthropologist at Clemson University.
Wow.
So no toxicology, no autopsy, but what the anthropologist noted was no evidence of scavenging. A coyote tearing at your leg or insects eating at your body. So there is no skeletal trauma. There is again, and that the anthropologist emphasized multiple times no evidence of scavenging. She determined that his time of death could have been anywhere from 6 to 32 days from the time he was found. So there's certainly a mystery enveloped in this case. But according to the Greenwood County Sheriff's Office, there is no evidence indicating any foul play or any evidence that substantiates any rumors circulating online consisting of his body being subject to chemicals, a fire, torture, or the like. The anthropologist did note that portions of his finger bones were missing. And that's all they have at this time.
Mm-hmm. Total mystery.
A total mystery. The Greenwood County Sheriff's Office is encouraging anyone with information to reach out. They say they have followed these social media rumors as well, which, I mean, there's just too much to keep up with at once.
Story's got that information. Folks that want to, if they've got information.
I mean, they're encouraged to reach out to me too. Again, at Andy at FITSNews.com, because I'm more than willing to investigate whatever rumors, whatever allegations there may be. And if there is evidence to corroborate anything that's been said online, just know I've got a strong enough stomach to where I would be more than willing to look it over. Folks have alleged to have evidence that have reached out, not to us specifically, but other members of the community. They lead them on a rabbit chase and then disappear into the night. It makes you wonder.
I think you'll find something at the end of that rabbit hole. But Andy, keep us posted on that case. And also, as we continue to track the R.J. May story, keep us posted on what you find on that story, will you?
Of course.
So our media outlet continues to follow those stories. Obviously at FITSNews, one of our areas of focus is what happens after folks land in the South Carolina judicial system, when charges are filed, when they move through the court system and holding that system accountable. It has been a problem in South Carolina. In fact, the big Murdaugh story was supposed to resolve that problem, but as we've seen, it has created some of those issues all on its own. But Jen Wood joining me now, one of the judges here in South Carolina who has been the poster judge for many of the problems with our system, Bentley Price, former circuit court judge. Thank God we can finally say that now. Former circuit court judge. Price was found unqualified last fall by the South Carolina Bar and then subsequently by the state's Judicial Merit Selection Commission, which is the panel dominated by lawyer legislators that typically rubber stamps the judges that they want, the judges that give them the rulings that they like. But in this case, due to the public outcry against so many of Price's miscarriages of justice, he was found unqualified. But Jen, he wasn't kicked off immediately. He sat on that bench for another, 7 months?
Yeah, until June.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a long time to just sit on the bench after being found unqualified for the position in which you're sitting and continuing to make rulings. And, you did a great story this week on the effects of that. And I did a story earlier in March, and that story, the way it wrapped up, same thing. I mean, there's a lot of people feeling the effects of that decision to let him continue to serve. And I think the situation, Bentley Price being found unqualified as a sitting judge, it's pretty unprecedented. So I don't think it's something that, South Carolina's run into.
Yeah, and you mentioned your story and my story. Dylan Nolan also had a great story just last month detailing one of Price's last cases on the civil or criminal front, rather, involving a serial alleged abuser of women who received a sweetheart treatment, if you want to call it, from Judge Price. And again, he was represented, shocker, by a lawyer legislator. But we did a big story also back in February. There was a big case tied to the Murdaugh saga, the outrage case related to the boat crash lawsuit. And there was a certain attorney who was very eager to keep Bentley Price on the bench. In fact, argued that those disqualifications or those findings that he was unqualified only applied to his reputation, not his ability, that he should be allowed to stay on these cases that are obviously hitting pretty close to home to some folks, Jen Wood. But as we look at the broader impact of Bentley Price's reign of terror on the judicial branch down there in the South Carolina Low Country. Oh, and by the way, Price withdrew from that big case that's Murdaugh adjacent. He ultimately decided, I think after our stories, that he was probably going to get kicked off of it. But he withdrew, and another judge was put on that case. That judge has issued some orders, which we referenced in our coverage. But we also wrote about a case where a plaintiff is asking for a new trial based on allegedly erroneous jury instructions that Bentley Price gave. And again, as Dylan wrote about just last month, this criminal case that clearly lawyer-legislator influence rearing its ugly head, or certainly appearing to. Jen, let me ask you a very bottom-line question. If a judge is found unqualified, reputation, ability, whatever, should they be allowed to remain on the bench for over half a year?
Absolutely not. I mean, I was talking to the family of Heath Watkins, who was a victim of murder. Stephen Rivers was convicted of murdering him. And, you know, in sentencing in March, you know, Bentley Price gave Stephen Rivers, it was 25 years, suspended to 11 years with credit for time served. Based on his ankle monitor. And the ankle monitor, when they checked his monitoring records, he had like hundreds of times violated the terms of that ankle monitoring. So he gives him credit for all this. And when I looked at his, record with the South Carolina Department of Corrections, he's eligible for parole in 2026 for
murder. Yeah. Unbelievable.
So, you know, they appealed that decision. Bentley Price heard the appeal in May, just weeks before he was off the bench, and denied it. And they've got no recourse. They can't, they can appeal it to the higher courts, but in terms of Bentley Price's behavior, what you would typically do is file a complaint with the Office of Disciplinary with the Supreme Court. And he's not a judge, so nothing that they can do to him. They can't suspend him from the bench because he's no longer on the bench. There's no recourse for that behavior.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up that ankle monitor issue, Jen, because with Bentley Price, it isn't just these backdoor deals on scheduling cases to hear pleas. It's not just the plea deals, the controversial sweetheart plea deals. It's not just these weak, anemic sentences for repeat violent offenders, but there's this ridiculous argument that somebody who had an ankle monitor and violated it repeatedly somehow should get credit for jail time for that period where they were just basically going wherever the hell they wanted to in violation of a court order. It's insane.
Right. And we're talking, people, the South Carolina judicial system is backed up. So people are awaiting trial for, this murder occurred in 2020. So he was awaiting trial on an ankle monitor for, 3 years. And it can be 3 to 5 years before somebody goes to trial. If they're on an ankle monitor, they get all of that credit and they're not monitored.
Yeah, it's just an absolute joke, and it's a slap into the face of all these victims to sit there and say, oh, well, we're going to give him credit for time served when he was habitually violating a judge's order. But again, Jen, par for the course in South Carolina. We talked about the ankle monitor stuff in the Bowen Turner case, where you had another lawyer legislator representing a violent offender accused of multiple violent sexual assaults. In that case, violating the ankle monitor habitually, and again, no consequences. But Jen, I want to pivot a little bit. We're talking about the Bentley Price saga. Thank God, again, this guy's off the bench, but we talk about the damage he's done. We talk about his role in this Murdaugh adjacent case. There was some Murdaugh news this week, specifically the federal government firing back hard against Alec Murdaugh's bid to reduce his federal sentence. You'll recall Murdaugh received 40 years from the feds on the financial crimes he pleaded guilty to originally back in September. There was that big dust-up over Murdaugh allegedly violating the terms of his plea deal by lying on a polygraph. Both sides eventually resolved whatever that was, got back together, and entered into a plea deal. But Murdaugh challenging that sentence on Eighth Amendment grounds. But Jen, the feds pushed back hard this week.
Yeah, and Murdaugh's saying that, the sentence violates his Eighth Amendment right. It was, excessively long compared to the crimes that he admitted guilt to. And the feds pushed back hard. They said, when you signed this plea deal, you signed a waiver of appeal. You knew going into it that Judge Gergel could vary, he could go differently from what the sentencing guidelines are.
Upward variance,
and he did
they
do
call it.
upward variance. Yeah, he did do an upward variance, and it was a strong pushback from the feds. He did sign that, and they disagreed that his sentence was grossly disproportionate. He is where he is for a reason. But oral arguments for that are scheduled in Virginia federal court at the end of October.
Well, I was very impressed by that federal motion because it really did break down this bid by Alec Murdaugh to reduce that sentence. I want to go ahead and state for the record, I don't think Alec Murdaugh should see one day of that federal sentence taken off. Not one day. I think he should serve every day of those 40 years and in the federal system with no parole. Hopefully he will. The man does not deserve to breathe free air again. I think we've said that on many occasions. But the feds, I thought, did a very good job on two fronts, Jen. Number one, they talked about how Murdaugh's allegations that this violated his Eighth Amendment right, that does not fall within the scope of that, as you mentioned, plea agreement and the waiver of any appeal. And the feds pointed out, hey, if we allow everybody who doesn't like their sentence to come back and say, oh, my Eighth Amendment rights are violated, what's the point of getting an appeal waiver and a plea deal at all? I thought they did a great job on that front. But where they really, I felt, did a exemplary job in this motion was refuting the argument from Murdaugh's attorneys that they were trying to penalize him for those murders, Jen.
Right. They said that they specifically were not. And I think that's an important case to make because, that is, you hear that a lot when discussing that sentence.
Yeah, a lot of folks had said that, well, you never would have thrown the book at him at quite this level if it were not for those murder charges. But I thought they did a great job of shooting that down and highlighting the fact that, look, this guy did two things. He brutally murdered wife and younger son, per the findings of that Colleton County jury last March, but he also stole $10 million from some incredibly vulnerable people. They said he should be punished for both.
Yeah, he violated the trust of people. It's, as an attorney, I don't think any crime is scarier.
Indeed, but also as we film this, Jen, as we film this show, new filings in the state appeal, and as we've discussed on several prior occasions, Alec Murdaugh looking a lot better at the state level regarding his potential for a new trial. If he doesn't get it at the state appeals court, a very strong chance that he could get it in federal court based on the jury tampering by former clerk of court Becky Hill. Now, speaking of Becky Hill, Jim, we got some news on that front too this week, don't we? Walk us through this. There's this crazy new podcast out. Walk us through what the hell is going on with this new podcast.
Oh, gosh. Becky Hill's co-author, Neil Gordon, just keeps popping up. So he has, in June, he launched a book called Trial Watchers, focused on individuals, that follow trials and go to trials to watch them.
Wait. Hold, Jen, I got to ask you this. This is a podcast about people who watch trials. It's not about the people in the trials. It's about the people that watch the trials.
Yep. So yeah, after the book, they launched a podcast with his wife. During, as everything was breaking about Becky Hill, in the fall of 2023, the jury tampering allegations, how she, they're alleging that the defense is alleging that Becky Hill tampered with the jury so that she could write a book and it would get published. Neil Gordon was, a supporter of Becky. There's no way. And this week, I think it was July 30th, actually, so a little over a week ago, they launched their first podcast episode, and a good portion of it was dedicated to Becky Hill. And he is telling all, apparently. So basically throwing her under a bus.
Yeah. I tell you what, folks, I wouldn't rob a bank with either of those two. I'm just going to go ahead and throw that. I wouldn't rob a bank with either of those two. Now, Gordon is a guy, obviously he runs a business there in Augusta, I believe it is. Jen has some publishing concerns over there in Augusta. That's his line. That's his work. But this notion, again, I still can't get over the fact that there's a podcast devoted to people watching trials. My God, I mean, what are we doing here, Jen? When have we gone from our friend Valerie Borline, who we're going to interview later this month, she talks about how there's this Murdaugh saga and there are these Murdaugh adjacent stories. I mean, this is like 6 degrees of Alec Murdaugh to the nth power with some of these people. Jen, at what point are people just grifters on this story and not actually journalists trying to uncover truth? At what point are they just profit-driven grifters?
I mean, he addresses that. I mean, part of the split between the two, where the relationship soured, the last text Becky sent, according to Melissa Gordon, sent to Melissa, said that Becky accused Neil of using her as a stepping stone, and that just angered them. And they said, she said that made her furious, and that is not what happened. Yet we're seeing him trying to do this first podcast based on his relationship with Becky. He's going to tell everything.
But here's my point, is just discussing that part of it. That is 30 seconds of our life that we are never going to get back. Who cares? Who cares what emails these idiots sent between each other? Who cares?
It's exhausting. And yeah, I think, at this point, what you're seeing, what we're all seeing, there are some great books that came out, Jason Ryan, Valerie Borline's book. But a lot of the stuff coming out is just people trying to still profit off of this case, which it's insane. I can't get over it.
Well, and obviously, I mean, Becky Hill remains in the news to some extent because there are still decisions awaiting prosecutors regarding what's going to happen to her for the jury tampering and a host of other things that she's been accused of that FITSNews has reported on extensively. So, I mean, I guess there is some newsworthiness to that. But my God, sending emails about, oh, you hurt my feelings on an email. Who cares? Grow up. Jesus. Yeah. Jen, I'm sorry. That stuff that's not journalism, folks. That's not journalism. But anyway, Jen, on this story, anything else we need to cover before we head out of this segment?
No, I mean, I think that's it. Clearly, we've got a lot of things coming up in the Murdaugh case. People are still reading it. There's still interest in it. We'll keep people updated as, more filings get dropped, more information comes out. But that was it for the week.
Jen, just promise me, and I'll promise you, if you hurt my feelings on email, I won't go talk about it on a podcast. Will you do the same for me? Can we?
You know me. I'll just call you and be like, "What? What are you doing?"
Well, Jen, thanks. We will obviously, in the event there's something important in those Murdaugh appeal filings that came down just yesterday on Friday, we'll obviously be updating that over the course of the next week. But Jen, thank you for keeping us in the loop on all the news, and in this case, not news, as it relates to this saga. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Will.
All right, so if you watched our month in review last week, you'll note we skipped the political section, and in large part, it was because our political swami, the guy who's been calling literally everything in the 2024 election correctly so far, Dylan Nolan, was on vacation last week. But you're back this week, so we're going to talk some politics this week. Dylan, the big news, arguably this week, the selection of Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, as Kamala Harris's vice presidential nominee. Before we get into the big story involving the governor this week, I want to ask you just overarching, What's with this pick? You pick a diehard liberal governor from Minnesota. Is that supposed to help this ticket? How did Kamala Harris think this was going to help her?
It's very interesting. I feel as though both camps, J.D. Vance obviously is a pick that was the most MAGA option on the menu, and I think similarly Governor Walz is the most hardcore progressive option, which the Democrats could have gone with. And it almost feels as though both sides have eschewed the electability component in favor of picking somebody who is ideologically as diehard as it gets. And it's very interesting because if either side had chose to play towards the middle, I think they could have picked up more than they're going to pick up with their picks. And I'm not saying that, that if you're a Democrat, you shouldn't like Tim Walz, or if you're a Republican, you shouldn't like J.D. Vance. But it's certainly true that neither of these people are milquetoast moderates who are going to let their parties pick up people in the center.
No, that's for sure. You're looking at two candidates who basically are reinforcing the opposite ends of the political spectrum. Dylan, in a race where the decision is going to be made by independent voters in a handful, 6 or 7 swing states, wouldn't you want somebody that's going to appeal to that very small subset of voters?
Well, the interesting thing is that it's going to be up to Republicans to make sure that Tim Walz doesn't appeal to those people, because I don't know about you, I was not, closely following his political career prior to him being considered for this position. But I think that when he's on stage, he's kind of got I heard it described this way, and I thought it was good, the Joe Biden body, but the FDR campaigning style. I think he's a powerful speaker. I think that most people have no clue about his record as governor, and I think his record as governor is something that Republicans obviously are going to be able to exploit, because he's pursued a number of extremely progressive policies, and he's gone on record on media on numerous occasions over the course of decades supporting these policies. So obviously there's a lot for them to go after in attack ads. But if you watch him on stage, if you're unfamiliar with him, I think that he has a lot of appeal.
Yeah, absolutely. A teacher, a coach, a former military. We're going to get into that in just a second. A member of Congress, governor, great resume, just from a pure resume standpoint. But
I think rhetorically he's more talented than Kamala.
Well, you say that like that's a difficult thing, Dylan.
No, the bar, I admit the bar is not high there. But, you watch him speak and then you watch her speak at these events, and it's like, wow, he really, he has a star power that she doesn't.
So one brings the progressive red meat, the other brings the progressive word salad, is that?
Well,
Kamala's the
more
roughage?
importantly, she brings a huge demographic base, which are going to, provide a lot of votes.
Indeed. Well, let's talk a little bit, though. You mentioned about how it's the Republican Party's job to brand Tim Walz a certain way to those independent, moderate voters, just as it's the job of the Democratic Party to brand
J.D. Vance is weird and hating cat ladies.
All that stuff, which, he's made a few unforced errors. Let's call it straight here. I mean, there have been unforced errors on both sides, but the scandal swirling right now around Walz is arguably much bigger than any issues J.D. Vance is facing, and that is an issue of stolen valor. Dylan, for those who aren't familiar with this term, what is stolen valor?
Stolen valor is when somebody purports to have completed military service, which they have not actually done.
Is that like rank or being in a certain theater, or what's?
I mean, it completely ranges from the guy in the Wendy's who's likely mentally ill, who's wearing a military uniform that doesn't really make any sense. I mean, you see the pictures of people wearing like Fulberg Colonel uniforms in their early 20s in the Wendy's getting their military discount, and obviously that person doesn't have everything going on up top.
But those nuggets are good, man.
Yeah, and cheaper. But it also ranges to politicians who might exaggerate their record, basically just trying to deceive people into thinking that they've done things that they never did. Obviously, the Swift boat incident with John Kerry, where he took major political blowback after claiming to have seen more action in Vietnam than his records indicate he ever did, is an example of this happening in American political history, and certainly something similar could happen in this situation.
Well, let's go through the specifics. You did a big story of this, and before I read your story, the only thing I'd seen online was that he's wearing a hat, special forces hat, and some special forces guys were ticked off, basically saying, hey, if you weren't one of us, you don't wear the hat. And I can see that, but it's a little deeper than that, isn't it?
Right. So let's start this off by saying, neither of us have served. He served 24, 25 years in the National Guard, and obviously we need to thank him for that. But this controversy arises because he has, done nothing to dispel the idea that he has seen combat when other people in his party have said that. And he has, in fact, himself implied on multiple occasions that he deployed in a combat capacity. He was giving a speech advocating for gun control, talking about the need to keep weapons of war out of civilian hands, and just said weapons of war that I carried. Which,
in war. In fact,
war.
let's listen to that real quick.
Hope woke up like many of you did 5 weeks ago and said, Dad, you're the only person I know who's in elected office. You need to stop what's happening with this. I'll take my kick in the butt for the NRA. I spent 25 years in the Army and I hunt. And I gave the money back, and I'll tell you what I have been doing. I've been voting for common sense legislation that protects the Second Amendment, but we can do background checks. We can do CDC research. We can make sure we don't have reciprocal carry among states, and we can make sure that those weapons of war that I carried in war is the only place where those weapons are at.
But Dylan, very clearly, he says there that I carried in war. Is that? Don't you take that to mean in a combat zone?
Certainly, one could reasonably think that. And I mean, this is not a controversial way to interpret this. CNN's own fact check analyst on live television said as much, that one could certainly be forgiven for thinking that this is him indicating that he carried weapons of war in a war zone, when in fact that did not happen. But there's more than this statement. He also has, for his whole political career, run on having participated in Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom, which is the one that occurred in Afghanistan. He was deployed to Italy in support of that operation. However, he has always left that part out and lets people think that he was in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm. Dylan, let me ask you this question. You mentioned neither of us have been in the military. My grandfather was a captain in the Air Force in World War II, so a lot of folks have family traditions of folks serving. But let me ask you this. What do you think is just serving, even if you're in the rear with the gear, that's something people are going to respect. And if you say it as a politician, people are going to, okay, well, why is there this need to embellish service? Because clearly if it's one of those things, you embellish it and get caught, there are consequences.
It's interesting, and he's not the first politician to fall into this trap. I think it's, if you're a politician, oftentimes you are playing fast and loose with the truth on a number of matters. And I don't think that he, pants on fire lied. But he played fast and loose with the truth, and it's dangerous to do, politically in a situation like this, because there are folks who did put their life on the line. There are folks whose sons or daughters didn't come home. There are folks who did deploy to those dangerous situations. And when you're in the military, everybody knows who's, taking risks, and everyone knows who's trying to collect credit without taking risks.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about the state of the race moving forward. Obviously, this scandal will have an impact. We'll have to wait and see just how much of an impact. But as we look at the top of the ticket, earlier this summer, everything was going right for Donald Trump. You had Biden in free fall. You had the Democrats literally at each other's throats about what to do about it. It was Donald Trump's race to lose. Swing state polling had him with margins that were beginning to stretch, outside the margin of error. Sites, even though
New York was possible.
Right. This was a race that was trending toward a Republican electoral landslide. Obviously, the Democratic decision to give Joe Biden the boot, replace him with Kamala Harris, has paid tremendous dividends in terms of realigning the calculus. Where do you see the race right now? Who do you think is going to pull it out here now, just a little over 80 days away?
Well, I don't think this is a controversial position if you look at the Vegas odds right now, but I think it's now Kamala's race to lose. Now, there are 90 some odd days before this election, and we saw just this weekend the global financial markets are in a very precarious position at the moment. and 90 days is an awful long time for them to remain on a knife's edge. So if there's a precipitous economic decline, that could certainly change the calculus on this election. But if things, remain where they are right now, I would say it's Harris's election to lose.
Wow. How things change on a dime.
It's true, but also you have to look at the polling organizations which are telling us that Kamala's taken the lead, and question the credibility of a lot of these organizations, because a lot of them are the same ones that were blowing smoke up Hillary Clinton's butt in 2016 and failed to predict Donald Trump's victory. I will say there are some organizations, Rasmussen polls I would point to, who are arguing that the fundamentals of the race haven't changed, and they have been consistently taking polls on a number of questions, not just, top of the ticket, who you're going to vote for, but how do you feel about this economic measure? How do you feel about the future of the country? How do you feel about the prospect that you're going to have a good future? And, those types of questions, not those specifically. And the responses to those haven't changed, which is why some are arguing that there might be some manipulation of the poll results. And that is certainly a thing that happens. Pollsters who are, let's be honest, they're paid by politicians, they're paid by political parties. And if that's how you make your living, it's not the greatest incentive for you to publish true data. It's the incentive for you to publish data which your clients want you to publish.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll be following this race incredibly closely over the next few weeks. Dylan, you've done an amazing job predicting what was going to happen up to this point. So we're going to keep you on the hot seat. Keep it rolling. What is it they say? Let it ride. If you got a hot streak, let it ride. Keep rolling those dice. You've been turning up 7s and 11s so far, man. So your analysis has been spot on. Great to have you back, and we'll see where this race goes.
Indeed we will.
All right, that's a wrap for this week's edition. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I want to thank everybody for supporting and subscribing to FITSNews.com. That's what empowers everything that we do here. Over the next few weeks, count on us to keep you posted on the very latest developments in the tropics with the RJ May investigation and with all the bigger political, true crime, and court stories that we've been following. We will check you next week on The Week in Review.